Hello, dear friends. It is now Pesach. I would like to talk about what I call from Korban Pesach to Korban Todah, the Paschal offering, and as a paradigm for offerings in the temple, and a paradigm understanding the development of the offerings in the temple. And let's take it from here. What specifically is about, and this will help us understand the whole concept hopefully, of the korbanot as far as we can for a generation that's been removed from it for approximately 2,000 years. If we look in Parshat Bo, let's start in Parshat Bo, which of course chapter 12 in Exodus and Shmot tells the story of the Paschal offering. And let's look at some of the things that are mentioned in chapter 12 about the Paschal offering. So they took a set. It could either be they could either take a sheep or they could take a goat, and it was taken together with their neighbors because remember, a sheep is a relatively small animal, but even so, it's usually eaten not by one person, sometimes not even just by a family. It could be a few families together, which is exactly what happened in the Exodus story. And they would take it at the 14th day and they would bring it. And then it was offered, and then it was killed on the 14th in the afternoon and eaten at night. And of course, the children of Israel left Egypt in the middle of the night. Now, at that time, which was also the night of the 10th plague, the slaughtering of the firstborn, so the Israelites put the blood with a hyssop on their lintel on the doorpost and on the lintel of the door, and this way God passed over, and that's why we call it Passover, the house or the angel of God passed over the house of the Israelites and slaughtered the firstborn of the Egyptians, from the firstborn of Paro to the firstborn of the simplest Egyptian. And so, what does it say about actually the eating of the Paschal offering? Well, you're supposed to eat this Paschal offering, tzli. It has to be roasted. Tzli eish, roasted by fire. And it says it cannot be bashel muvusha b'mayim. It cannot be cooked in water. What would be the reason for this? Now, of course, later on the temple times, all of the offerings were roasted. But I want to give a very simple idea here. Because it's at home, a person, of course, it's easier for a person to cook the meat in water than it is to roast it by fire, unless you do it outside or you have a fireplace. And you didn't want to go outside because of the fact that I remember there was the angel of God slaughtering anybody who didn't have the blood on the post of their house. So the Torah had to say this explicitly. Why is this? In the book of Deuteronomy, we have a prohibition of eating the blood. It says, "Lo tochal et adam lo tochelu." You cannot eat the blood. Ala aretz tishbechenu kamayim. You have to throw it onto the ground. And another place it says not to eat the blood. Ki hadam hu nefesh. For the blood represents the life, vitality, the nefesh, the soul of the animal, and therefore you do not eat the blood. Since we have a prohibition of the blood, normally most of the blood is usually, first of all, after whatever, of course, comes out naturally, but even the blood itself from the various parts of the animal is removed by salting after you cut the animal up and divide it into the various parts that it's normally sold in. Salting is done by first putting in water for half an hour, salting for an hour with coarse salt, which is known as kosher salt, then rinsing it 3 times. This is to remove the blood from the animal. This, of course, was only given in the book of Deuteronomy, which the book itself is Moshe's final oration to the people of Israel, and therefore they did not know this at this point. And so the Torah tells them it's very important that you roast it, without telling them that the roasting will remove the blood anyhow, automatically, because roasting is always another option. If you don't have salt, to roast the meat will remove the blood. So this night they're told to roast the meat and not to cook it in water. And then they're not supposed to leave it until the morning. Anything that is left has to be burnt, but they're supposed to eat the whole thing as much as they can. Anything left is supposed to be burnt. And then, of course, they have to prepare themselves and be ready to leave Egypt at midnight. So this is the first offering. The interesting thing about this offering is that they're just eating a family, relatives, friends dinner of unleavened bread and lamb, and also maror, the bitter herbs, was together with this, which in our tradition, there are 5 different plants that could be in bitter herb. Ashkenazim use the horseradish. Many of the Sephardim use romaine lettuce. Others use chicory. Others use endives. So the Mishnah actually points out 5 different times of bitter herbs. And bitter does not always mean piquant in the case of, in this case. But the point is, what I'm trying to say here, that they are eating in honor of God. They're eating in honor of leaving Egypt. It's a different concept. It's not giving the animal to God. It's giving the animal, eating the animal in gratitude. Different concept. They're grateful for the ability to leave Egypt. They're going to be leaving Egypt as soon as they finish. That's why they also had to brush unleavened bread to take with them to leave in haste at midnight. But they have to have that meal as a meal of gratitude. This is very interesting. Before I get back to this point, I want to mention something else. You see, in the book of Shemot, there is what I call the sandwich. The sandwich is that the last 5 portions, perikop, or portions, parshiot, are built like a sandwich. You have Truma Tetzaveh, which are the commands to build the tabernacle, the sanctuary. And then you have Vayikara Pekudei, which is how it was carried out by the architect, Bezalel ben Oholiav, from the tribe of Judah, and how it was helped with anybody who had the ability to help, and everybody chipped in and also gave money for the various things that had to be bought and made. But between those 2 parshiot of the commands and 2 parshiot of how it was actually done, right in the middle of this sandwich, you have Parshat Ki Tisa, which tells us the story of the sin of the golden calf. Now, this is very unusual because the sin of the golden calf, according to the most logical understanding of the book of Exodus, happens exactly 40 days after God spoke the Decalogue to the people of Israel, which is Parshat Yitro. So really, it should be Parshat Yitro, or at the most, Parshat Mishpatim, at the end of Mishpatim, when Moses goes up to the mountain at the end of Mishpatim to bring down the tablets. Right there it should be. Why is it broken up by Truma Tetzaveh, which is talking about the sanctuary? Well, it's been said before that after the Jews, the people of Israel, showed that they needed some type of intermediary, some type of icon. And even though it's true that the fault, you might say, of the golden calf was a small amount of people, in fact, Rashi and other commentaries say, like the Ari, say there was specifically the mixed multitude from Egypt, who for them, it was unheard of to do any type of religious ceremony without an icon, because that's what they were used to. And the Jews who had lived in Egypt, they knew that icons were not allowed, and idols, etc. But, when you're so used to another culture, and somebody comes along and says, let's give it a try, because after all, Moses has been gone, it's 40 days already, and, maybe we misunderstood. And then, of course, they build the golden calf, and Moses does come down from the mountain and sees them dancing. And he breaks the tablets. and he churns it into dust and makes them drink it. Then he tells the tribe of Levi, to go kill everybody who is actively involved in worshiping the golden calf. Now, it's interesting that the book of Exodus says only 3,000 people were killed. Why do I say only? That means out of the probably 1.5 million people who were there living in that area. Why do I say 1.5 million? Because in the book of Numbers, it says it actually enumerates the men from the ages of 20 to 60 who are of military age, and it comes to 600,000. If you add to that the children, if you add to that the women, assuming there are at least as many women as men, so just add to the 600,000, we're talking about probably 1,600,000, maybe 1,700,000. Add to that the mixed multitude, which could have been in the tens or hundreds of thousands from Egypt. We're talking about lots of people. So if only 3,000 were actively involved and everybody was just passively looking from afar, it means that most of the people understood it wasn't a good idea. But it's true, you can also participate by your quiet, by your silence, which is a problem. And that's why it was considered a sin for the whole people, because of the fact they were complicit in their silence. So many have said, number one, why is then Kisisa later on with the sanctuary? Number one, why spoil a nice 2 chapters in the Torah? Vayitro tells the great story of God revealing himself to the whole people of Israel. Why ruin a good story by what happened later? Mishpatim, where we're given the laws of how to set up a just society according to the Torah. Again, why spoil everything by talking about the golden calf? And of course, the Mishpatim, it ends off. There is an offering, which I'm going to discuss also, which is actually what's called a brit. It's an offering of covenant between God and Israel that we're going to keep the mitzvot, and Moses goes up to receive the tablets. Now, what I want to say, so the question is, again, I also, of course, there's Bo, B'Shalach, Yitro, and Mishpatim. And as I said before, at the end of Mishpatim, which I will talk about soon, but not exactly at this moment, is the idea of the brit, the covenant, which is done here at the end of the parasha. This Moses going up to the mountain is in chapter 24, verse 18, which is the end of Mishpatim. So, why is it that Kiti says later? Some people explain it the way I just said, that why ruin a good thing? So put it later. But there seems to be more, because it's literally sandwiched in between the parshat of the Mishkan, of the sanctuary, the tabernacle. It seems, therefore, that since the Israelites seem to have this need for some type of, let's say, intermediary, though God wanted to accommodate them. You need an intermediary, you need a place, an icon, build a sanctuary. If you build this tabernacle, which will be the place of God, that'll put you into the feeling, and there you'll be able to reconnect with God in that sanctuary. Now, the interesting thing is, when you look at the parshiot of Truma Tetzaveh, mostly Truma, there's an exception to Tetzaveh I'll mention, and Vayakab Kudei, it talks about building the tabernacle as an edifice, it talks about the vessels of the tabernacle, it talks about the clothing of the priests that they're supposed to wear. But aside from Tetzaveh, where they do mention the first 8 days of the sanctuary where Moses and Aaron were doing various inauguratory offerings, there's nothing else about the offerings. It almost seems to suggest that, as the Torah says itself, Vasuli Mikdash, V'shachanti b'tocham, as it says in Parshat Truma. I want them to build for me a tabernacle, a sanctuary, and I will reside in their midst. I will dwell in their midst. So God is saying that's the point of the tabernacle. God doesn't say it's for the korbanot, for the sacrifices, for the offerings. In the book of Vayikara, in Leviticus, it will be more explicit, and I'll mention that too. I might break this up into two parts, depending on how long it takes, but I'll get to that too. But the idea is that, especially in the parshiot of Vayikra, Tzav, and Achremot, you have a lot, and Emor, excuse me, Vayikra, Tzav, and Emor, also in Achremot about Yom Kippur. So there you have details of the offerings, but not really in the book of Shemot. It just talks about all the details of building the sanctuary. So the question is, even when God thought about the idea of the sanctuary, let's say, did it necessarily include the offerings? Or were the offerings a necessity for the people because they couldn't understand religion differently? Remember with Judah Levi in his Kuzari, for those who are familiar, in the 11th century, in his book, the Kuzari, when in his dialogue with the king of the Khazars, the king says to him, how is it that this people, after God revealing himself to the whole people, they worship a golden calf? What's wrong with them? So Judah Levi said, yes, this is a very embarrassing point, but let me try to explain. And he says, when you live in an environment, in a society, where everybody is worshiping gods through icons, and there's no concept of worship without an icon. You need the icon. You need the this idol as a conduit. They didn't think the idol itself was the God. They thought the idol was a conduit in order to worship God. So therefore, the Jews who had lived in Egypt for more than 200 years as slaves, and even longer than that as non-slaves, you get affected by the culture without realizing it either. Israel ba'amim avdei avodah zara b'tahara, says the Talmud in Avodah Zarah. That sometimes the Jews in other cultures are affected by the other cultures without even realizing it. And so I'm sure all the Jews knew when there was only one God. That was not the issue. But I guess there was some question, maybe, an intermediary is not a terrible thing. Until now we had Moses. Moses was the intermediary. He was the Ish Elohim. Now he's gone. What do you do now? But the only active ones seem to be those 3,000, but everybody else watched in their silence. So it appears that after the Chet HaEgel, there's a necessity to have the whole gamut of the Korbanot. And we can see this also in Vayikra, in Parshat Tzav, which we just read last Shabbat. Because in Parshat Tzav, we have a very interesting verse. Okay, excuse me, it's in chapter 17 in Achremot. So the verse says like this: Leman asher yaviu b'nei Yisrael et zivichem asher him zovchim al pnei hasadeh ve'hevium l'Hashem. In order, meaning all these korbanot, all these offerings, are in order that the children of Israel bring their offerings that they offer normally in the fields, let them bring it to God, to the sanctuary, to the Kohen. And they shall bring their offering shlamim. A shlamim is an offering, a peace offering, which is eaten by the person and the Kohen together. And the Kohen shall put the blood on the altar, but the rest is eaten by the person and the Kohen. And then the next verse 7, even more interesting than verse 5. And that let them not bring any more their offerings to the spirits. Sirim is almost like a demon that they normally would go after. And this will be a law forever, for every generation. In other words, when you live in a culture where everybody is bringing as a religious practice, as a staple of the religious practice, something basic, some type of offering to some type of God, it's very hard to explain to people that this one is different. This is what Maimonides says in his Guide for the Perplexed. He claims that even all the laws of the korbanot, of the offerings, were actually giving in to the fact that the people, the needs of the people, that they weren't on the level to just have a sanctuary without. So here you can see that the verses are also seeming to implicate such an idea. Can you imagine today somebody who have a religion, and the religion there's no prayer? Somebody say, so what do you do? Now, if you think that's unusual, I mean, because we consider prayer a very fundamental part of religion. So how can you have a religion with no prayer? Now, the truth is it does exist because in one of the denominations of Buddhism, you have Mahayana and Hinayana and Mahayana. And one of the denominations, you have the idea that God is not personal at all. I mean, the God of the Buddha, of Buddhism, is not necessarily a persona. So if there's no person, if there's no personality, then why are you praying? But despite that, they have temples and they pray to the Buddha and whatever. So even when you have a religion which theoretically should not have prayer, but people have this need for prayer. This is what happened in antiquity. If you extrapolate, they had this need for giving offerings because that's the way they were brought up to understand religion. So even though the Torah and Shemot would prefer there just be a sanctuary and let the symbols of the sanctuary, the various vessels and the clothing, which represent the world in general, there's a lot of a discussion about that in the writings of Malbim. He goes into the great detail, Meir Leibish Malbim of the 19th century. But it seems that it seems that the Torah gives in, or God gives in, to the needs of the people with the korbanot. But then, and how can you also see this? You can see this even in the rabbinic commentary. The very fact we have what's called the Haftarah, right? The Haftarah of the first two parshiot of the book of Vayikra. First two parshiot of the book of Vayikra, you have a Haftarah on Vayikra and Sav. The interesting things, and the Vayikra and Sav are both, of course, talking about offerings in great detail. Now, the Haftarah, what we read from the prophets in Vayikra, is from Isaiah 43, and it starts off like this. This people who I have created, they will tell my glory. And then it goes on. You didn't call out to me, Jacob. You didn't bring your offerings to honor me. You didn't even bring your flour offerings to me. You never bought me. You never brought me money, and you cannot buy me with money or with your various offerings, because after all, you just burden me with your sin. So you have the first Haftorah of Vayikra, which is right away looking at the offerings as derogatory. It's like a funny way to start the book of Leviticus, which is full of the offerings. Now let's look at the Haftorah of Tzav, which is even more, let's say, critical. This is taken from Jeremiah 7, verses 21. I did not speak to your ancestors, and I never commanded them when I took them out of Egypt about bringing offerings. Olav Zevach. This is what I told them. Listen to my voice, and I will be your God, and you will be my people, and you shall go in the way that I shall command you. That's what I told them. Wait, is God denying the book of Leviticus? Now, we find this a lot in the prophets, other places in Isaiah too, and Amos. Why? Now, I have to be very specific here because really what the prophets are saying here, at this point, they're not against offerings in general because remember, it is part of the Torah in Leviticus. All they were saying is the people started abusing the idea of the offerings. I'm giving an expensive offering. I brought a cow. I brought a couple of sheep. So I'm a good Jew. So what does it matter? God will forgive me. Prophets say, no, it doesn't go that way. The offering is a means to an end. You bring this, okay, you're showing your commitment. You take that life of the animal. You have to think, as Nachmanides says, that you should have taken your own life because of what you did in your iniquities. And then you're asking for forgiveness and you're changing your ways. What does it matter how much the offering costs? So bring a cheaper one. Bring a flower offering. Bring a bird. Why do you have to spend so much money? It's about changing you. So the prophets are very, this problem, of course, we know it historically, it was a problem in the church, in the Catholic Church, what was called indulgences. And because of that, the whole Reformation took place within within Christianity. So if you want to say this was our Jewish problem with indulgences, who people thought we have a temple, we have the sacrifices, okay, we're okay. We don't have to worry. Also in Jeremiah chapter 7, Jeremiah says, the people keep saying, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem Hema. They keep saying, it's God's house, nothing will happen. God won't destroy his own house. Jeremiah says, what do you mean? He destroyed his sanctuary in Shiloh, so he could do the same in Jerusalem. Why do you say it's God's house? Because God wants the heart. And the offerings are not important. Now, again, because it was given, it's given, and it's part of the law. But despite the fact that it was given, you see the way the first Haftarah react. Now, I want to continue this line. And my question is, what exactly, let's look for offerings that happened before the sin of the golden calf. Okay, and this will give us an idea, maybe what God wanted to be done in the first place. Now, I have 3 to 4 examples which happened before the sin of the golden calf. The first one I just stated was the Paschal Offering. First offering of the Jewish people, it's all eaten by the collective families together, and it's an act of gratitude to God. We are leaving Egypt. It's not necessarily because of sins, but there are always things you did wrong, especially as a slave. But it's gratitude. God's taking us out. Let's look what else. I'm going to open up in the book of Shemot. Exodus. And there's a very interesting thing in the beginning of the book of Yitro, the portion of Yitro. Yitro is right before Mishpatim, and it's in my other book. This is I'm reading from the beginning of Parshat Yitro, Jethro, that's Moses' father-in-law, chapter 18, 12. Now, Yitro heard everything that happened, the plagues and leaving Egypt. And then it says, now I know, verse 11, Yitro says, that God is greater than all the other gods. And then it says, Vayikach Yitro. And Yitro, the father-in-law of Moses, brought offerings to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel, and they sat to eat bread with Yitro before God. It's very interesting, the juxtaposition of these two things and how contrary they look. Yitro, who according to our tradition was a priest of paganism who decided to become a monotheist because of his relationship to Moses, he turned a leaf. But he brings offerings to God because that's what you do when you believe in a God, right? And it says in that same verse that Aaron and Moses and the elders sat down to eat bread before God. See what's going on here? The one who's bringing the offerings is the non-Jewish Yitro. The one who's sitting to have bread before God as gratitude is Aaron, Moses, and the elders of Israel. Let's keep going. Now, at the end of Mishpatim, which is the parsha which talks about the building a just society based on the laws of the Torah. So right at the end of chapter 24, you have the chapter of the Brit. But before that, before the covenant, it says that the younger ones of Israel, some people say they were the firstborn, brought offerings, olotos vachim shlamim, peace offerings before God. And then Moshe takes the blood of the offerings and puts it on and sprinkles the blood on the altar. And he takes what's called the book of the covenant, which according to Rashi was book of Genesis and just the Decalogue. And he reads it to the people, and the people see everything that God said we will do. And then he takes the blood and he throws it on the people, over the people, and he says, this is the blood of the covenant which God has made between you about all these words. And then it says that the elders of Israel and Aaron and Nadav and Avihu, his children, saw the God of Israel. Or, I mean, they saw revelation. And then it continues. But to the Atzilei B'nai Israel, to the important ones of Israel, and Rashi says the same people, which is Nadav, Avihu, and the elders. They saw God, and they ate and they drank, but God did not do anything wrong against them. So, there's an interesting controversy here among the Parshanim. What does it mean that God didn't do anything? Lo shalach yado, didn't do anything wrong to them. So Rashi says, well, it wasn't the right thing. If you have a revelation of God, why are we eating and drinking? But other Parshanim, like the Ramban, like Chizkuni, say no. They were eating and drinking out of gratitude for the covenant they were supposed to do. And they were eating the shlamim, the peace offerings that were brought by the bechorim. This is before the Kohanim were made Kohanim, I guess. It was the bechorim, you had the firstborn. They brought these peace offerings, and they were eating it and drinking before God. That's what we do, just like in the Paschal Offering. Just like Moses and the elders when Jethro came to see them. So there seems to be a line here of how things are actually happening. And one other thing I'll tell you, even if you look exactly what happened at the sin of the golden calf in Kitisa, if you look at the sin of the golden calf, what does it say? This is in chapter 33. Chapter 33. I have to get to the beginning. Actually, it's from 32. Chapter 32. Okay. The people see that Moses is taking his time to come back, and they say, create for us some type of God to go before us, because this man Moses who took us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. And they're afraid. So they said, maybe they need a conduit to pray to God. And Aaron says, okay, bring your zahav, your gold and your jewelry, hoping that he'll gain some time. And he also said it'll be tomorrow, not today. But they do it. And what does it say exactly? Aaron says, okay, tomorrow there will be a festival for God. What do? Verse 6 of chapter 32. They get up in the morning. They bring olot and shlamim, peace offerings. And then they sit to eat and to drink. In other words, the people know that in worshiping God, you always have to eat and drink. By the way, if you even in Parshat Yitro, what did Yitro brought? He brought olot, only olot, which are sacrifices where it goes only on the altar for God. You don't touch it. Because this was the mindset in antiquity. People thought, I bring an animal for God. I'm not allowed to have it. Here you have this idea that the main part of the korban is you sit and eat it. You give part to the Kohen, who, by the way, has no land, so he actually needs the support. And the blood is thrown over the altar because you can't eat the blood anyhow. So it says, Vayelo olot vayagishu shlamim. They did give olot, but also shlamim, peace offerings, and they sat to eat and drink this. But then, of course, the sin was vayakumu litzachek, which according to Rashi is all different immorality, which very often was part of the worship of the Baal, of the Astartes, etc. And of course, the golden calf itself, which is worshiping an image. But my point is that you can see from the fact that the eating and the drinking, which was done originally, I'm saying that it was sort of mimicking what they had seen before, but they got everything wrong, of course, with the image of the golden calf and the immorality after that. So, to sum this part up, what I'm trying to say is that it appears from the few places that we had before this in the golden calf, the idea of the korbanot was an idea of eating and drinking before God out of gratitude. And just to prove this directly from a midrash, so midrash says, and I think it's Vayikara. For some reason I lost it. A moment, here it is. Vayikara is a midrash on Leviticus, on Vayikra, and this is Et Zayin, the 9th chapter, the 7th midrash. The midrash says, Rabbi Pinchas and Rabbi Levi, Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Menachem of Galia, says, Latid lavo, in futuristic times, all of the offerings will be annulled, betelin. Korban toda eino batel. But the peace offering of gratitude, which is called Korban toda, will never be annulled. And all of prayer, even he says, will be annulled, except prayer of gratitude. So it's discussion by itself. The other type of prayer is asking for things. But let's talk about the one of the korbanot. When we look in Parshat Tzav, there are two types of shlamim. You have shlamim and you have todah. And according to this, the only peace offering, which will be still a peace offering, is the one that the person who brings it eats, and parks goes to the Kohen, and the blood is on the altar, will be the one of gratitude. The one of gratitude, by the way, comes with 40 breads, 40 loaves of breads, where about 30 of them, if I remember correctly, are unleavened, and 10 of them are leavened. And they're eaten together with this peace offering. Again, it's a festive meal. Because it's so much of it, you have to do it within a 24-hour period. You have to bring all your friends and your family, and it becomes a festive meal of gratitude before God. So this seems to be the original idea of the korban. Interestingly enough, today, the only korban at the moment that we can still bring, because we don't know the exact place of the altar on the temple, and also the people are impure. But even if the people are impure, there is a halachic idea that tuma utra b'tzibur, that when all the people are impure, you can still go through the actions, but still you need to know where to sprinkle the blood on the altar. And if you don't know the place of the altar, it's a problem. So the only actual korban we can bring today is the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Offering, the first one. The one where we bring an offering in gratitude to God for making us his people and taking us out of Egypt and eventually bring us to the land of Israel. That's the only one we can actually do today. We have some political issues, But if we solve those, halachically, it can be done. Which makes you think, maybe we're trying to start this on the right foot. So this was what I wanted to say. I hope it helped people understand the idea of the Paschal Offering and how it becomes a sort of paradigm of what the korbanot is supposed to be in the end. And this whole interesting drama between Shmot and Vayikra of giving into the whims of the people, according to Maimonides, because of the fact that they needed this type of sacrificial service, because this is the way they understood religion. All people did at that time. But now that we've gone through the galut and we're restarting again, we're in a situation where the only actually korban we could bring would be the Korban Pesach. It looks like when the time comes and the political situation calms down and we are able to work out things with our neighbors and co-religionists, it could be that this could be a good beginning of understanding the meaning of the korban as this festive gratitude before God. And I wish everybody Chag Sameach Moadim L'Simcha. And as our rabbi said, B'Nisani Galu, B'Nisan Atidin Li Gael. In the month of Nisan, we were redeemed the first time, and the eventual redemption will happen in the month of Nisan too. Mirabi Amenu, Amen.